Chief Technology Officer in the city of Toronto, largest city in Canada, approximately 2.9 million people, a global city, fourth largest in North America. And in my role, in balancing as a technologist for over 20 years in the evolution of this space, I still remember when we were dealing with dial-up as opposed to Wi-Fi. So maybe I'm showing my age through this conversation. But also having a very large city, a very diverse city, and how do you manage all the information in terms of the ability to ensure that technology not only is positioned for good, but it's being used in a way that presents opportunities that caters to a broader group from an equity and a diverse lens, and also focused on those who may not have the ability to have broadband or basic services to even be in the dialogue when it comes to interacting on TikTok or even interacting on some of these forums. So my talk speaks to the fact of the world is certainly interconnected on many fronts. We are global. For us today, we're in all different parts of the world. But the ability for us, certainly in the public service and as government officials, to provide actionable solutions to address those local and global issues requires very creative solutions. And social movements has now become an avenue for the society and for the residents, the businesses, the stakeholders, the people that I have a responsibility to serve in the city, both inside the city and also outside in terms of the public, to have a voice that presents change. And that change now, the voice through this pandemic, does mean the diversity and inclusion of those ideas and those thoughts to build a sustainable social, economic, and environmental and equitable society. So when those conspiracy theories do go around, and it's a platform that is utilized through technology, it does create a challenging discourse in how society, and especially in the municipal level or in local levels, because we are closest to the people, in how we're trying to manage complexities in a very large government at times in terms of people feel that they're included in the conversation. So technology has produced that avenue to engage in a way. And to be effective and to be easy. We can do it from home. We can do it from any part of the world. We just need that phone or we need that device. But it also has led, has been said in this, to disruption. Now, the question is the disruption going to be creative in terms of the social movement, or is it going to be used for harm? So the question that becomes is that we build a community. Now, certainly I'm in the smart city space, but we've tried to evolve that language. And it's not about creating a smart city that will then lead to the disruption. It's about creating a community that is connected, a connected community that can utilize a lot of these platforms for positive movement that creates that inclusive society through political, social, economic, and technology awareness of policies that are developed constantly to evolve at a rapid pace. And more importantly, to ensure democracy and transparency exist for people. Joseph talked about trust in terms of getting trust. And I will talk about how some of the areas as a public servant, in my case, in how we're trying to build that trust, which hopefully will debunk, maybe not all through the platform, but it's a grassroots movement. There is clearly a balance of freedom of speech. We do want technology to allow people to express themselves. But we also want to ensure that the health, safety, and the prosperity of all our communities continuously evolve. And generally, the current policies we have in place in terms of technology specifically are challenged to maintain relevance. The government policies were written in a very time when it wasn't a digital time, but it was a paper-based time. And the ability to change those policies in rapid pace to meet the technological evolution that changes in minutes, seconds, hours, weeks is constantly a stress and a pressure, and the decisions are interrelated. As government, you can't make those decisions in silos. There's federal governments, there's, in the US, we would call it, state governments, in Canada, provincial governments, and then there's local or municipal, and those governments all have to walk about, whether it's for privacy and security, to ensure that within a democracy and transparency, there is a voice. So part of my role and my challenge is less about being a technologist, but really about being somebody that understands how the technology is formed to bridge that conversation to ensure that people can have that voice. So I see it as creating an environment, but it's based on conducting a respectful civil dialogue, because without respect, And sometimes the social media helps us hide behind that piece. We can agree to disagree, but the civility of how we do that is what really speaks to how we can really challenge in terms of, is the information accurate? Is it based on science? Where is it coming from? And now with a lot of the political environment, it is sometimes very challenging to have that civil discourse and refrain from personal attacks or commentary on social media, but in really creating a psychological safety for the voices of people who feel that I can't really contribute to this conversation because I don't feel there is a psychological safety. And also pushing the viewpoint of new policies to be created in very critical, fast, accelerated speed. And the pandemic has shown some of that, of how government can really react in a very agile, fast, and the ability to respond based on facts and science as opposed to social engineering, or what I would call the herd mentality that essentially says that I've now got to be part of the herd because if I don't, I will be ostracized or I feel differently. And part of the ways now to move is that how are we tackling that? I'm going to use some examples, certainly in how we are in Toronto tackling that. One of the things in my group, in my team, is that we really wanted to anchor the city and public service on digital infrastructure principles. Because what we have to do is that if we're anchored on guiding principles, it sets the tone of how we want to engage. And there are certain principles we've come across. So we talk about a principle about the first principle, how do we want to run the society, run the government, well-run city, as we call it. The next principle very much speaks to the social, economic, and environmental impacts. There's a generation that is pushing very much for climate change, the ability to ensure we have sustainability. And some of our remote from home, working from home, there's things we've done that. So if we can agree through information that climate change is important and the way we see climates changing rapidly in different parts of the world, that is a baseline of a principle that can help us to push back on misinformation. The next component is democracy and transparency. We are elected in democratic in terms of we're going to the polls, we're elected public officials, and then those public officials have to work with the bureaucrats or the staff to ensure that we address those policies in the will of the people. And one of the ways we've been pushing is engagement. We have a group called Community Advisory Group where we do grassroots engagement. It's now all digital, which is positive. And some of that engagement it comes from creating a forum so people can just share that speech, but in a way that is a civil dialogue where we agree, disagree. So engagement in all areas, the private sector, the public sector, the ability for grassroots, the ability for underserved community, Black, Indigenous, people of color, now pushing it to the voice and saying, we need to hear from you. We're going to take your message in and we're going to incorporate that in how we evolve government policy. And a new principle we just started to include is something called digital autonomy. This is a new principle in the city of Toronto we've started looking at. And really what it speaks to is the fact of referring to the city's ability to develop, maintain, and control the selection and use and design of its digital infrastructure, which becomes very powerful in how we use that digital infrastructure to deliver services to help the society feel that they are advancing it through prosperity. And ensuring that the legislation and the community involvement, the community is involved in how they affect legislation, and that it isn't just sat with a group of small people in terms of closed rooms that are making decisions about various society groups and primarily people that are marginalized, which really focuses on the Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And they feel there. So in that component, I see certainly my role in how bridging from when we didn't have the internet, I was still a generation that didn't have the internet, that there wasn't social media, there wasn't 5G, to a generation now that has been raised to that, but ensuring that through public service, we can really change or influence the changing of these legislations that will protect, that will ensure civil discourse is respectful, but also hold accountability for those areas in our society through our elected body, whereby we can really challenge to say, is this the tone of society? So as much as, and I'll wrap up, as much as I see myself and as part of this conversation as a technologist, I see myself as a public servant in a very important role to help navigate those conversations. And it comes with consultation and grassroots feedback to say, what do we want prosperity, not in a specific group, but in the overall society, so people feel that they can contribute. And that's where I think the danger of the misinformation and the disinformation can lead to if we do not grab a hold from the government area to really start to manage and to message that based on the positions we have to be able to be serving the public.